The high noon sun over Denver was a merciless hammer, beating down on the cracked ochre earth until the distant mountains shimmered like a fever dream. Levi Mallister felt the heat sear through the soles of his worn leather boots as he moved through the throng of bodies on Larimer Street. The city was a cacophony of life. The clang of a blacksmith's anvil, the rattle of wagon wheels on hard-packed dirt, the distant tinny music of a saloon piano. But to Levi, it was all just noise, a constant reminder of the life he had left behind. He was a ghost here, a man without a badge, without a purpose, haunted by the one time his nerve had failed him. A single moment of hesitation, a single bullet that had found the wrong target, had been enough to strip him of his identity, leaving only the shell of the lawman he once was. He was heading for the post office, a mundane task for a man who used to track killers across the plains when the world exploded. The sound was a deafening roar as the plate glass window of the First Denver Bank shattered, spraying jagged shards across the boardwalk. Screams tore through the street's dull rhythm. 3 men, their faces obscured by dusty bandanas, burst from the bank's entrance canvas sacks slung over their shoulders. One of them fired a pistol into the air, the crack of the shot sending people scrambling for cover like startled quail. Levi's training kicked in before he could think. He dropped low, his body instinctively seeking cover behind a water trough. His hand flew to his hip, his fingers finding only empty air where his Colt revolver used to rest. The feeling of helplessness was a bitter, familiar taste in his mouth. He watched as the town's lone sheriff, a portly man named Abernathy, emerged from his office, his face a mask of panicked resolve. "Stop in the name of the law!" Abernathy bellowed, his voice cracking under the strain. The robbers laughed, a raw, ugly sound. The leader turned and fired not at the sheriff, but into the dirt at his feet, sending up a spray of dust. The message was clear: stay back. They sprinted for their horses, tethered in a chaotic heap by the alley. As they mounted, one of the younger robbers, clumsy in his haste, fumbled his sack. Gold coins, glinting like evil eyes, in the brutal sunlight spilled across the street. He cursed and swung down from his saddle to scoop them up, a fatal mistake. Sheriff Abernathy, emboldened by the error, took his shot. The bullet caught the young robber in the chest, throwing him backward against the side of a freight wagon. He slid to the ground, a dark stain spreading across his shirt. His companions didn't even look back. They spurred their horses, disappearing in a cloud of dust and chaos, leaving their fallen partner behind. The street fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the wheezing gasps of the dying man. People emerged slowly from their hiding places, their faces pale. Levi pushed himself to his feet, the ghost of the lawman inside him, refusing to stay buried. He moved toward the robber, his steps slow and deliberate. The man's bandana had slipped, revealing a face no older than 20, covered in the fine, pale dust of a farm boy who had taken a wrong turn somewhere in his life. His eyes, wide with shock and pain, found Levi's. "Help me," he rasped, a bloody froth bubbling at his lips. Levi knelt beside him, his gaze professional, and detached a mask he wore to hide the tremor in his hands. He knew the wound was fatal. There was nothing anyone could do. The boy's hand scrabbled at his own chest, fumbling inside his coat. He pulled something out, his fingers slick with blood, and pressed it into Levi's palm. "For Marcus," the boy choked out, his eyes glazing over. "Tell him the debt is paid." With a final shuddering sigh, his body went limp. The weight in Levi's hand felt impossibly heavy. He looked down. It was a silver pocket watch, ornate and beautifully crafted. An intricate engraving of a hawk in flight adorned its cover. Levi's breath caught in his throat. He didn't need to open it to know the inscription inside. He had seen it 1,000 times as a boy, held it in his own hands while his uncle had lectured him on the value of time and legacy. The watch had belonged to Marcus Mallister, the estranged uncle whose long shadow had loomed over Levi's entire life. A cold dread washed over him. Why did a common bank robber have his wealthy, reclusive uncle's most prized possession? And what did he mean by a debt being paid? The questions swirled in his mind, eclipsing the chaos of the street around him. The pocket watch in his hand was no longer just a piece of silver. It was a key, a catalyst, a tangible piece of a mystery that had just reached out from the grave to claim him. His quiet, aimless life was over. The ghost of Marcus Mallister had just given him a new purpose. The law office of Elias Thorne felt like a tomb. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the grimy windows, illuminating shelves bowed under the weight of leather-bound legal tomes. The air was thick with the scent of aging paper and stale pipe smoke. Thorne himself, a man whose frame seemed as brittle as the documents he handled, peered at Levi over a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles. "Levi Mallister Thorne," said his voice a dry rustle. "I must confess, I'm surprised to see you. When your uncle passed, we sent notice. We received no reply." "I've been moving around," Levi said the words, feeling inadequate. He placed the silver pocket watch on the polished surface of the desk. It gleamed under the lamplight, a stark contrast to the office's pervasive gloom. "A man died yesterday. He had this." His last words were about a debt being paid to Marcus. Thorne's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He picked up the watch, his long, thin fingers tracing the engraved hawk. Astonishing. This was Marcus's most treasured belonging. He was never without it. He looked up at Levi, his gaze sharp and probing. "You say a man gave it to you?" "A bank robber, shot by the sheriff. He died in my arms." A heavy silence settled between them. Thorne placed the watch down gently, as if it were a fragile relic. "Your uncle's affairs were complex. He was a man who cultivated secrets as other men cultivate gardens. He left behind a number of outstanding business arrangements, some less savory than others." "What kind of arrangements?" Levi pressed, leaning forward. "Marcus was a brilliant man, but a ruthless one," Thorne explained, choosing his words with a lawyer's precision. "He made a great deal of money, and in doing so, he made a great many enemies. He believed that every man had a price, and if he couldn't buy them, he would find a way to break them." The description matched the man Levi remembered, a formidable patriarch, who saw family not as a source of comfort, but as an extension of his own legacy, a legacy Levi had failed to live up to. His will was quite specific. Thorne continued pulling a thick file from a drawer. "The bulk of his financial assets are tied up in trusts and ventures I'm still trying to unravel. But he left one thing directly to you: his sole piece of real estate." He pushed a folded deed across the desk. Levi picked it up. The paper was brittle with age. In elegant looping script, it named him the sole proprietor of a plot of land, and all structures upon it located in a remote stretch of the territories. The name of the property was Millfield Hollow. "I've never heard of it," Levi said. "Few have," Thorne replied, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "It was a small mining town your uncle founded some 20 years ago. There was a silver strike, a brief boom, and then a tragedy. The main mine shaft collapsed. Killed over a dozen men. The survivors abandoned the place overnight. It's been a ghost town ever since." A worthless ghost town. It felt like a final posthumous insult from an uncle who had always considered him a disappointment. Why leave it to me? "The will states the property must never be sold," Thorne said, adjusting his spectacles. "It can only be passed down through the Mallister bloodline. As he believed you were his only living relative, it fell to you. The lawyer paused. He also left this. He slid a small leather-bound journal across the desk. It was unmarked, its pages filled with Marcus's familiar aggressive handwriting. His personal log. Perhaps it will offer you some clarity. On the matter of the watch, I can only speculate. Marcus was entangled in a bitter dispute with a former business partner around the time the mine collapsed. A man named Samuel Dutton. It's possible this debt is connected to him. Levi tucked the deed and the journal into his coat. The watch felt cold in his pocket. He was being pulled into his uncle's past, into a web of secrets and enemies he didn't understand. But for the first time in months, he felt a flicker of the man he used to be. There was a trail to follow, a puzzle to solve. Maybe it was a path to some kind of atonement. This partner, Dutton Levy, asked, his voice low. Where would I find him? Thorne shook his head. He vanished after the disaster at Millfield Hollow. Rumor was he went east, made a new fortune. But men like Dutton don't forget a grudge. If he believed Marcus owed him something, he would pursue it to the ends of the earth. The journey to Millfield Hollow was an exercise in solitude. For 3 days, Levi rode through a landscape that grew increasingly stark and unforgiving. The lush greenery of the plains gave way to arid scrubland, and the earth bleeding shades of ochre and rust under a vast, indifferent sky. The sun was a constant, oppressive weight. The only sound was the rhythmic plodding of his horse's hooves, and the whisper of the wind, a lonely sound that seemed to carry the secrets of the desolate land. He thought of the past, of the shootout in Abilene. The face of the young deputy, barely 18, who had looked to Levi for the signal to draw. Levi had hesitated just for a second, seeing the fear in the outlaw's eyes, hoping for a peaceful resolution. That second had cost the deputy his life. The guilt was a physical thing, a knot in his gut that never truly loosened. He had traded in his badge, unable to bear the weight of the authority. It represented the memory of his failure. This journey, this inheritance, felt like a penance, a final task set by a dead man. On the 4th day, he saw it. Tucked into a shallow canyon sheltered by a ridge of weathered rock formations, lay the skeletal remains of a forgotten dream. Millfield Hollow. From a distance, it looked exactly as Thorne had described, a collection of silent, sun-bleached buildings slowly surrendering to the elements. But as he drew closer, a sense of profound wrongness settled over him. The deed said the town had been abandoned for 20 years, but the wash hanging on a line behind one of the cottages was still damp, swaying gently in the breeze. Levi reined in his horse, at the edge of what should have been empty ruins, his eyes scanning the scene. He saw smoke, a thin gray tendril rising from a chimney that had no right to be lit. Someone had swept the porch steps of the main house recently. Someone had tended the small vegetable garden behind the derelict schoolhouse, its rows of beans and squash green and vibrant against the dry earth. Someone was living in his ghost town. His gaze was drawn to the house at the very end of the street, the largest building in the settlement. It was better maintained than the others, its windows clean, its porch rail solid. As he watched, a lace curtain in an upstairs window twitched. It fell back into place, but not before Levi caught a glimpse of something impossible. A young woman's face pale as morning frost, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it seemed to transcend mere surprise. It was not the fear of being discovered by a stranger. It was the primal terror of seeing another human being for the very first time. The papers in his pocket suddenly felt heavier than lead. Every official record, every word from the lawyer was a lie. He nudged his horse forward, the crunch of gravel under its hooves sounding like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. He dismounted, looping the reins around a hitching post that should have rotted away years ago. The town was a paradox. The sign above the general store was faded, its letters peeling, yet the windows were spotless. The wooden sidewalk beneath his feet showed no signs of rot. He approached a small cottage with faded yellow curtains tied back with blue ribbon. Through the window, he saw a small table set for two, and the plates and cups arranged as if waiting for guests who were long overdue. His horse whinnied behind him, a nervous sound. Its ears were pinned back, its nostrils flared as it stared toward the town's central well. Levi followed its gaze. A wooden bucket sat on the stone rim, the rope still swaying. Dark spots of spilled water glistened on the dust, evidence of recent use. Someone had drawn water within the last few minutes. He was being watched. He could feel it. The silence was not empty. It was deliberate, curated. It was the silence of a creature holding its breath, waiting for a predator to pass. "Hello," he called out, his voice feeling small and intrusive. "My name is Levi Mallister. I'm the new owner of this property." The only answer was the sighing of the wind through the eaves of the abandoned buildings. Then a door creaked somewhere behind him. He spun around, but every door on the street remained shut. He heard it again, longer this time, a soft, protracted groan of old hinges. Then a sound so faint he almost missed it. Light, careful footsteps moving across a wooden floor inside one of the houses. They stopped abruptly. Levi's hand moved to his hip, a useless, ingrained reflex. He felt naked without the familiar weight of his pistol. He had come here to survey land, not to confront the impossible. The footsteps resumed a ghostly patter that seemed to move from one building to the next, always just out of his line of sight. Someone was shadowing him, using the empty town as a shield. From the house at the end of the street, a new sound emerged, a sound that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. A woman's voice, young and clear, singing a soft, mournful lullaby in a language he had never heard. The melody was haunting, filled with a sorrow that needed no translation. Drawn by the sound, he moved toward the house. As he reached the front steps, the singing cut off, replaced by the sharp sound of an indrawn breath. Miss Levi called softly, "I don't mean any harm. I'm just trying to understand." The silence that followed was absolute. He circled the house, his boots sinking into the soft soil of a thriving vegetable garden. Herbs hung drying from the porch rafters. A small chicken coop housed half a dozen birds that clucked contentedly. This was a home cultivated over years, not a temporary shelter. The back door creaked open. Levi froze. Through the narrow gap he saw a flash of dark hair and pale skin before the door snapped shut again. "Please," Levi said, raising his hands to show they were empty. "The lawyers told me this place was empty. Are you alone here?" The response was immediate and violent. The back door flew open, and an old man emerged, moving with the surprising speed of a cornered animal. His clothes were of a style 20 years out of date, and a long gray beard, meticulously braided, hung to his chest. He held a rifle, its barrel leveled squarely at Levi's heart. He held it not with the shaky hands of an old man, but with the steady, unwavering purpose of a guardian. "You need to leave," the man said, his voice a low growl, rough from disuse. "This place isn't for outsiders. Never has been, never will be." His eyes were pale blue, fierce and possessive, burning with a protective fire that was startling in its intensity. "And if you know what's good for you," he added, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "you'll forget you ever saw her." Levi held his hands higher, his mind racing. This was the caretaker of the ghost town's secrets, the keeper of the impossible girl. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, keeping his voice calm and even. "My name is Levi Mallister. I inherited this property from my uncle Marcus Mallister." At the mention of Marcus's name, something flickered in the old man's weathered eyes, recognition and a deep, profound weariness. "Marcus Mallister," he repeated slowly, as if the name tasted of ash. Been expecting this day for near on 20 years, I suppose. Though I hoped it might never come. He lowered the rifle slightly, but his grip remained firm. Name's Ezekiel Thorne. I've been the caretaker of this place since the troubles started. What troubles? Levi asked, taking a cautious step forward. The records say the mine collapsed and everyone left. Ezekiel's face hardened deep lines, etching themselves around his eyes. Some truths are better left buried, son. Your uncle understood that. He knew why we stayed hidden. Knew why the world needed to believe Millfield Hollow was empty. Behind Ezekiel, the back door opened a crack. Dark, curious eyes peered out from the shadows. The girl was listening. But why? Levi pressed. What required 20 years of secrecy? Ezekiel glanced back at the door, and his entire demeanor softened. The change was so immediate, so telling, that Levi understood in an instant. This was not duty. This was devotion. Her parents died in the mine collapse, Ezekiel said finally, his voice thick with memory. She was just a baby. I found her in the rubble alive. Her mother had shielded her with her own body. Everyone else fled. Scared of more cave-ins, scared of the bad luck they said hung over this place. But I couldn't leave her. The door opened wider, and the young woman stepped onto the porch. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with long dark hair that fell in a silken curtain past her shoulders and skin that had never known the harshness of the frontier sun. Her dress was simple, sewn from well-worn but clean fabric. But it was her eyes that held him captive. They were large and dark, filled with an astonishing mixture of profound fear and an even more profound curiosity. You raised her alone. Levi said, the pieces clicking into place. All these years, just the two of you. Ezekiel nodded, his grip on the rifle finally relaxing. She's never been beyond the canyon ridge. Never seen another soul but me. I taught her to read from the books they left behind. Taught her to garden, to mend, to survive. But I'm getting old, Mr. Mallister. My hands shake some mornings. He looked directly at Levi, his pale eyes pleading. I've been wondering what would happen to her when I'm gone. The young woman took a tentative step forward, her bare feet silent on the wooden porch. Every movement was graceful but cautious, like a wild thing learning to trust. She looked at Levi as if he were a creature from a storybook, a being of myth and legend. You have the same eyes as the man in the painting, she said, her voice soft and clear, untouched by the roughness of the world. She studied his face with an unguarded fascination that was both unnerving and deeply moving. The one hanging above the fireplace in the big house. Ezekiel's face grew troubled. Iris, you shouldn't. But she ignored him, her attention fixed on Levi. Ezekiel told me stories about the outside world, but I never believed there were really other people. You're taller than I imagined. She tilted her head, her gaze dropping to his calloused hands. They're marked by work I've never seen. Levi struggled for a response. Her innocence was a tangible thing, a force that disarmed and humbled him. What painting, he managed to ask, though a part of him already knew the answer. The one Uncle Marcus left behind, Iris said simply, the name sounding strange and foreign on her lips. It shows a man with your same dark hair and green eyes standing beside a woman who looks like me. Ezekiel said it was painted long ago, before the troubles came. She paused, her brow furrowed in thought. He said the man in the painting was my father. The confession hung in the air, a truth so explosive it seemed to suck the very breath from Levi's lungs. He looked at Ezekiel, whose face had gone pale. The puzzle pieces were no longer just clicking into place. They were slamming together with the force of a revelation. The girl Iris was not just some orphan. She was a Mallister, and his uncle had hidden her from the world for 2 decades. The next few days passed in a strange, suspended reality. Levi, sensing Ezekiel's deep-seated distrust, did not press for more answers. Instead, he sought to earn his place to prove he was not a threat. He noticed the well's pulley system was strained, the rope frayed, and the mechanism stiff with rust. Drawing water was a back-breaking task for the old man. Without a word, Levi unpacked his tools and spent a full day disassembling, cleaning, and repairing the well. He greased the gears with tallow from his pack and spliced the rope with a skill learned from years on the trail. Ezekiel watched him from a distance, his expression unreadable. Iris, however, watched with open fascination. She brought him a tin cup of cool water, her movements hesitant. "Why are you doing that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It needed fixing," Levi replied, simply wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "Ezekiel fixes things," she said, as if stating an immutable law of her universe. "He's an old man. Some jobs are too heavy." That evening, Ezekiel approached him as Levi sat by his small campfire. He carried a wooden bowl of venison stew. He didn't offer it as a gift, but simply set it on the ground near Levi, an unspoken truce. "You have a lawman's hands?" Ezekiel observed his eyes on the careful way Levi handled his tools. "Steady. Sure." It wasn't a question. "I used to be," Levi admitted, the words tasting like rust. "What happened?" Levi looked into the fire, the flames dancing like memories. "I hesitated." The admission cost him more than Ezekiel could ever know. The old man nodded slowly, a deep understanding in his pale eyes. The right moment to act is a hard thing to know. Sometimes not acting is the bravest choice. Sometimes it's the most foolish. He let the silence stretch before adding, "Marcus was a man of action. He never hesitated. It was his greatest strength and his greatest curse." With the fragile trust established, Levi began to explore the town, always under Ezekiel's watchful eye. He entered the main house, the one Iris had indicated. It was a time capsule. Furniture was draped in white cloths, dust lying thick on every surface except for a single path, worn from the door to the grand stone fireplace. And there above the mantel was the painting. Levi felt his breath catch. The man in the portrait was undeniably Marcus Mallister, but younger, his face unlined by the bitterness. Levi remembered his green eyes, bright with ambition. Standing beside him was a woman of breathtaking beauty, her dark hair and gentle features, a perfect mirror of the girl Levi now knew as Iris. And in the man's eyes, as he looked at the woman, was a tenderness Levi had never believed his uncle capable of feeling. It was the face of a man in love, a man with everything to live for. He found Marcus's study on the second floor. It had been left untouched. Books lined the walls, and a heavy oak desk stood near the window. It was here, in a locked drawer, he managed to pry open, that he found it his uncle's journal. Not the one the lawyer had given him, but an older one from his time in Millfield Hollow. He spent the night by his campfire, poring over the brittle pages. The early entries were filled with hope. Marcus wrote of the silver vein, of building a town from scratch, of creating a legacy for his family. He wrote of his wife Elena with a poet's passion, and of the birth of their daughter Isabella with a father's profound, unadulterated joy. October 12, 1854. Elena is a marvel. She has turned this rough-hewn house into a home. And Isabella, my little Bella, she has her mother's eyes. When I hold her, I feel as if I hold the entire world in my arms. My partnership with Dutton is proving fruitful, though the man's ambition worries me. He sees only the silver, the profit. He does not see the community we are building, the future. As the entries progressed, a darker thread began to emerge. The tone shifted from hopeful to anxious, then to outright fearful. January 7th, 1855. Dutton's accounting is suspect. The yields he reports from the mine do not match my own foreman's tallies. He laughs it off as a clerical error, but his eyes are cold. I feel as if a snake has made a nest in my home. On March 2nd, 1855. I have proof. Dutton has been skimming silver lining his own pockets. He has been cheating me from the beginning. I confronted him today. He did not deny it. He told me that business is a form of warfare and he intends to win. He spoke of his own father, a man my father apparently ruined in a business deal years ago. He said debts between families have a way of coming due. I see now this was never about partnership. It was about revenge. April 10th, 1855. Dutton is becoming reckless. I fear what he will do when he learns I have sent for the federal marshals. I must get Elena and Isabella away from here. Ezekiel, my foreman, is the only man I trust. He will help me. We have a plan. He will take them south tomorrow at dawn while I stay behind to face Dutton and the law. That was the final entry. Levi closed the journal, his hands trembling slightly. The mine collapse hadn't been an accident. It was Dutton's final desperate act to bury the evidence of his theft, and Levi suspected to bury his uncle. Marcus had planned to send his family away, but something had gone terribly wrong. He knew he couldn't shield Iris from the truth any longer. Tucked into the back of the journal, he found a folded, official-looking document. It was a birth certificate. Isabella Elena Mallister, born October 5th, 1854. Parents, Marcus and Elena Mallister. He found Iris the next morning tending her garden. She had begun to talk to him more freely, her initial fear replaced by an insatiable curiosity about the world beyond the canyon. She asked him about cities, about the ocean, about music and crowds of people. To her, he was a living storybook. "Iris," he began, his voice gentle, "we need to talk." He confronted Ezekiel first, showing him the birth certificate. The old man's shoulders sagged, the fight finally going out of him. "Her name is Isabella Levi," said his voice quiet but firm. "She is my cousin." Ezekiel nodded, his face a mask of grief. Marcus's plan went wrong. Dutton moved faster than we anticipated. He set the charges in the mine that night, not the next day. I arrived at dawn to help them escape, but it was too late. The whole town was in chaos. The mine had collapsed. I found Elena. She was gone, but she had wrapped the baby so tightly in blankets. Isabella was alive. I did the only thing I could. I took her and I hid. I let the world believe they both died. It was what Marcus would have wanted, to keep her safe from Dutton. As Ezekiel finished his confession, his eyes suddenly lifted, his gaze fixed on the ridgeline overlooking the town. "Dear God," he whispered. Levi followed his gaze. A lone rider was silhouetted against the morning sun, a motionless sentinel watching them from above. A scout. They had been found. The dread that settled over Levi was cold and absolute. The threat was no longer a ghost from a 20-year-old journal. It was here. They didn't have to wait long. The scout disappeared, and less than an hour later, 3 riders emerged from the tree line, their approach confident, unhurried. The lead man was tall and lean, dressed in a fine black coat that seemed immune to the dust of the trail. His face was handsome, his smile easy, but his eyes were as cold and lifeless as chips of obsidian. Levi recognized the face from old newspaper clippings he'd found in his uncle's Denver study articles detailing the bitter business rivalry between the Mallister and Dutton families. It was Samuel Dutton. He dismounted with a practiced fluid grace, his two thuggish companions remaining in their saddles, their hands resting near their holstered pistols. "Well, well," Dutton called out, his voice smooth and educated, a jarring sound in the rustic silence. "Looks like old Marcus Mallister's ghost town isn't quite as empty as the legends suggest." His gaze swept over Ezekiel, then Levi, and finally settled on Isabella. It lingered on her, an appraising proprietary look that made Levi's blood run cold. And who might this lovely desert flower be? Ezekiel stepped forward, placing himself between Dutton and Isabella, his aging body a fragile shield. "This is private property, Dutton. You're trespassing." Dutton's smile widened, a predatory slash in his handsome face. "Private property that carries a significant lien against it. Your former employer, Marcus Mallister, owed my family a considerable sum when he fled from his responsibilities. With 20 years of interest, that debt has blossomed into a veritable fortune." He produced a sheaf of legal papers from his coat. "I have a legitimate claim on this land and everything on it." "Marcus is dead," Levi said, stepping up to stand beside Ezekiel. "I am his heir. By law, any unsecured debts died with him." "Ah," the nephew Dutton purred, his cold eyes flicking to Levi. "I'd heard Marcus had a relation who disgraced himself out of a lawman's career. But you see, my claim is not unsecured. It is attached to the deed itself." His gaze returned to Isabella, who stood frozen behind Ezekiel, her face pale. And in the absence of traditional assets, one must become creative in how one collects. I must say, finding a living, breathing Mallister hidden away all these years is a most unexpected dividend. The menace in his voice was unmistakable. He knew exactly who she was. "You refer to my cousin Isabella Levi," said, his voice hard as iron, deliberately using her real name. "The sole surviving heir of Marcus Mallister, who is under my legal protection." Dutton's eyebrows shot up in feigned surprise. "Isabella, so the child survived. Remarkable. An unsettled asset from my family's long-standing business with yours. How delightful." He folded his papers, his movements slow and deliberate. "This changes things, of course. Makes my claim all the more compelling." He was testing them, probing their defenses, enjoying their fear. "Leave." Ezekiel growled his hand, inching toward the hunting knife at his belt. "Oh, I will," Dutton said, his smile never wavering. "This has just been a preliminary visit, an initial assessment of the estate. But I will be back, with more men and with the full backing of the law I have purchased. This valley and everything in it will be mine." He mounted his horse, his gaze locking one last time on Isabella. "I do hope you'll be a gracious hostess when I return to take possession." With a final chilling smile, he turned his horse and rode away, his men falling in behind him. They left a silence that was heavier and more terrifying than any sound. The illusion of safety was shattered. The sanctuary of Millfield Hollow had become a trap. The storm came without warning. One moment, the sky was a placid, sun-bleached blue. The next, the horizon turned a bruised, sickly yellow. The wind, which had been a gentle whisper, rose to a mournful howl, picking up dust and grit, scouring the landscape. A great rolling wall of red dirt descended upon the canyon, swallowing the sun and plunging the world into a choking, claustrophobic twilight. "He's coming back," Levi said, his voice grim as he strained to see through the swirling curtain of sand. "He'll use the storm as cover." Panic flared in Isabella's eyes, but she quickly suppressed it. The last 2 days had forged a new strength in her. The naive girl was gone, replaced by a woman fighting for her life and her identity. What do? We don't let him take this place. Ezekiel answered, his old eyes blazing with renewed purpose. He checked the load in his rifle. This has been my home for 20 years. I'll not see it fall into the hands of a murderer. Levi grabbed the rifle he had taken from his horse's saddle scabbard, the familiar weight, a cold comfort in his hand. Ezekiel, you and Isabella take the main house. Barricade the doors and windows. Stay low. I'll meet them in the street. I can draw their fire, give you a chance. No, Isabella said, her voice firm. We fight together. This is my home too. My father built it. I won't hide. Before Levi could argue, the first gunshot echoed through the storm, the sound muffled and distorted by the wind. A bullet splintered the wooden sign of the general store, inches from Levi's head. Dutton and his men, 6 of them now, were advancing on foot using the abandoned buildings as cover, their forms like ghostly apparitions in the red gloom. The world devolved into a nightmare of sound and fury. The shriek of the wind, the crack of rifles, the sting of sand in their eyes. Levi pushed Isabella and Ezekiel toward the main house. Go now. He ducked behind the stone well in the center of town, the air around him alive with the angry buzz of lead. He fired back, aiming not to kill, but to suppress, to slow their advance. His past failures screamed in his mind. Don't hesitate. Protect them. He could see Dutton directing his men with hand signals, moving with the cold efficiency of a wolf orchestrating a hunt. A bullet ricocheted off the stone near Levi's cheek, sending sharp fragments into his skin. He fell back, his ears ringing, and scrambled for the cover of the blacksmith's shop. The fight became a desperate running battle through the skeletal remains of the town. He moved from building to building, the dust storm his only ally, its blinding chaos creating opportunities. He caught a glimpse of one of Dutton's men trying to circle around to the back of the main house. Levi took a steadying breath, aimed, and fired. The shot was perfect, hitting the man in the shoulder and sending him sprawling into the dust. One down. Suddenly, a figure loomed out of the swirling red haze directly in front of him. It was Dutton. His fine coat was covered in grit, and his handsome face was contorted into a mask of pure hatred. Just you and me now, Malister, Dutton snarled, raising his pistol. The 2 men fired simultaneously. The roar of the guns was deafening. Levi felt a searing pain in his left arm as a bullet tore through the flesh. He saw Dutton stagger back, clutching his side, a dark stain spreading on his white shirt. But he wasn't down. Dutton lunged, tackling Levi and sending them both crashing through the brittle wall of the adjacent assayer's office. They landed in a heap of splintered wood and choking dust. Levi's rifle skittered away into the darkness. Dutton was on top of him, his face inches away, his eyes burning with a mad fury. You think this is about money? He hissed, his breath hot and ragged. You think this is about a mine? My father put a pistol in his own mouth because of what your grandfather did to him. He was a proud man, and the Malisters crushed him, left him with nothing. Marcus, he was just the final insult. A new generation of arrogant Malisters building their fortune on the ruins of my family. The confession screamed over the howl of the wind, laid bare the generations of hatred that had led them to this moment. This was not business. This was a blood feud. I destroyed his mine, Dutton rasped, pressing his forearm against Levi's throat. I watched his town die. I thought I had erased him, but then I hear his name again. I learn he left something behind. You. And then I find her. A living, breathing piece of him, left for me to extinguish. I came here to wipe the Malister name from the face of the earth, to finish what my father started. Dutton's grip tightened and black spots danced in Levi's vision. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, Levi slammed his knee into Dutton's wounded side. The man roared in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all Levi needed. He twisted, throwing Dutton off him, and scrambled for his fallen rifle. He got to his feet just as Dutton did, his pistol raised. For a heartbeat, time stood still. Levi had a clear shot. He could end it. End the threat to Isabella, end the cycle of violence. The ghost of the young deputy in Abilene flashed in his mind. "Don't hesitate." But another voice, quieter and stronger, answered it. "This is not who you are." Killing Dutton in rage and fear would make him no better than the man he faced. Redemption was not about revenge. It was about choosing a better way. Instead of firing, Levi lunged forward, using the rifle like a club. He swept Dutton's legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the floor. The pistol flew from Dutton's grasp. Before he could recover, Levi had the barrel of his rifle pressed against Dutton's chest. "It's over, Dutton," Levi said, his voice raw. "The debt is paid, but not in blood." The storm began to subside as quickly as it had arrived. The wind died down to a low moan, and a pale, watery light began to filter through the thinning dust. The silence that followed the battle was profound, broken only by the groans of the wounded. As the red haze cleared, a new sound reached them, the steady, rhythmic beat of approaching horses. Levi looked up to see a posse of riders cresting the ridge, led by Sheriff Abernathy. Before leaving Denver, Levi had sent a wire to the sheriff's office in the next county, a simple message outlining his suspicions about Dutton and Millfield Hollow. It was a long shot, but it had paid off. Sheriff Abernathy dismounted, his face grim, as he took in the scene of the battle. "Looks like we got here just in time for the cleanup." His deputies began rounding up Dutton's wounded men, their movements efficient and professional. Levi watched as they hauled a sputtering, defeated Samuel Dutton to his feet and bound his hands. Justice had been served not by a vigilante's bullet, but by the law he had once sworn to uphold. He felt the knot of guilt in his gut finally begin to loosen. Isabella and Ezekiel emerged from the house, their faces smudged with dirt, but their eyes bright with relief. Isabella rushed to Levi's side, her gaze falling on the bloody tear in his sleeve. "You're hurt," she whispered, her hand gently touching his arm. "It's nothing," he said, but his voice was thick with emotion. They had survived. Later, after the sheriff and his posse had departed with their prisoners, the three of them stood in the quiet street, the setting sun painting the canyon in hues of gold and purple. The physical wounds were minor, but the emotional ones ran deep. Ezekiel walked over to Levi, his old face etched with a contrition that was painful to see. "I failed, Marcus," he said, his voice heavy. "That day, the day of the collapse. I wasn't just coming to help him escape. I was supposed to bring him documents, proof against Dutton that he could take to the marshals. But I was late. A lame horse. By the time I arrived, the mine was gone, and Marcus with it. I spent 20 years trying to atone for that failure by protecting his daughter. I thought secrecy was the only way." Isabella stepped forward and took the old man's calloused hand in hers. "You didn't fail him, Ezekiel. You saved the most important part of him. You saved me." She looked at the town around them, at the silent, damaged buildings. "You gave me a home." She forgave him not with grand words, but with that simple, powerful truth. In the main house, a warm light from the fireplace pushed back the evening shadows. The air smelled of wood smoke and old memories. Isabella stood on a small stool holding the large, ornate frame of her parents' portrait. The painting was a ghost of a life she had never known, of a love she was only just beginning to understand. "I don't want to leave this place," she said, her voice soft but certain. "It's not a prison. It's my history. I want to make it a real home, a place where people can come to build something new, not to hide from the past." Levi stood behind her, his bandaged arm aching dully. He took the other side of the heavy frame, and together they lifted the portrait, hanging it in its rightful place above the mantel. Marcus and Elena Mallister, forever young and hopeful, looked out over the room. Their legacy was not the silver in the collapsed mine, but the fierce, resilient young woman who stood before them. Levi reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver pocket watch, the object that had started his entire journey. He held it out to her. "This was his," he said. "It belongs to you." Isabella took the watch, its cool weight settling in her palm. She traced the engraved hawk with her finger, her eyes filling with tears. "Ezekiel told me my mother loved hawks," she whispered. "She said they saw the world as it truly was, without borders or boundaries." As she ran her thumb over the watch's edge, her nail caught on a tiny, almost invisible seam near the hinge. With a soft click, a hidden latch opened. The front cover of the watch was a locket. Nestled inside, protected under a tiny circle of glass, was a miniature, hand-painted portrait. It was a perfect, loving image of her mother, Elena. A final secret message from a father to the daughter he had loved more than life itself. Isabella closed her eyes, clutching the watch to her chest. It was a bridge across time, a tangible piece of the love that had created her. Levi stood beside her, watching the firelight dance on her face. He had come to Millfield Hollow seeking answers about his uncle's past, but he had found something else entirely. He had found his own future. Together, surrounded by the ghosts of what was lost, they stood as a new family, their shared past now the unshakable foundation for a life they would build together.